The large lecture hall of the university was silent except for the scratching of chalk on the board. Bright white light poured down from the ceiling, shining on long rows of polished wooden desks. Students filled the seats, hundreds of them, all dressed in neat uniforms, eyes sharp with curiosity, competition, and sometimes arrogance. It was the kind of place where the best minds of the world came to prove themselves. Among those students sat a young black student. His clothes were plain, not as expensive as the others. He carried no expensive pen, no shining laptop. His posture was straight, but his silence drew whispers. Some students leaned close to each other, their voices just loud enough to be heard. "Why is he here?" one said. "He doesn't belong in this class," another whispered. "This is the hardest math program in the country. He'll never survive." Their words carried a poison, but the student did not answer. He kept his eyes forward, his face calm. At the front of the hall stood 3 professors, men who had taught at the university for decades. Their gray hair and confident eyes told the world they were untouchable, respected by all. They had trained king's children, millionaires' heirs, and the smartest minds across the globe. To them, teaching was not only a duty, it was a test of pride. They believed that only a chosen few deserved to stand at the top. And today, they had already chosen their target. The youngest professor, tall and sharp-faced, looked directly at the black student. A smile touched his lips, but it was not kind. It was the smile of a hunter before the strike. "Stand up," he said, his voice echoing across the room. The student slowly rose. His heart beat steady, but he said nothing. His silence made the whispers grow louder. Some students laughed quietly, waiting for the humiliation they knew was coming. "You are new here," the professor continued. "This is the most difficult class of mathematics in this university. Only the brightest survive. Tell me, do you believe you belong here?" The hall grew still. The student opened his mouth, then closed it. He did not argue. He did not defend himself. His silence was heavier than words. The professor's smile widened. "I thought so," he said. Then he turned to the board and wrote a long, complex equation. Symbols danced across the black surface like a storm. Integrals, variables, layers upon layers of numbers and shapes that only experts could read. He stepped aside and faced the student again. "If you think you belong here, solve this." A wave of laughter rippled across the room. Some students clapped their hands on the desk in amusement. Others shook their heads in pity. "It's impossible," one whispered. "He's finished," another said. The professors stood tall, their arms crossed, waiting. They had used this trick before, choosing a difficult problem to crush the pride of anyone who seemed unworthy. It always worked. The victim always froze, stammered, or begged for a chance to try later, but this time something was different. The student looked at the board. His eyes scanned the equation slowly, carefully, like a man reading a familiar map. The laughter around him sounded distant, almost like an echo from another world. Inside his mind, the numbers were not enemies, they were old friends. Still, he did not move. Not yet. The professors took his silence as fear. The oldest one chuckled, shaking his head. "Sit down, boy. Leave this work to real scholars." The words were sharp, meant to cut. The room erupted in more laughter, some cruel, some nervous. The student's fists clenched at his sides, but his face remained calm. He did not sit down. He did not run. Instead, he walked forward. Step by step, the sound of his shoes against the floor echoed in the silence that was slowly returning. Every eye followed him. Every whisper died. He reached the board, picked up a piece of chalk, and held it between his fingers. The chalk felt cold, fragile. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering long nights in small rooms, books scattered across broken tables, candlelight burning until dawn. He remembered the faces of those who said he would never succeed, never rise, never belong. And he remembered why he came here, not to prove himself to the professors, not to the students, but to himself. When he opened his eyes, the board was no longer a wall of numbers. It was a puzzle waiting for his touch. The youngest professor leaned back, crossing his arms with confidence. "Go ahead," he said, sure the boy would crumble in front of everyone. The student raised the chalk. The room leaned forward as one. The sound of the chalk meeting the board was soft, almost like a whisper. Line by line, he began to write. At first, the students laughed again. His hand was steady, his pace calm, but they were too blinded by their own pride to see the truth. "What is he doing?" one muttered. "He's guessing," another replied. But slowly, the laughter faded. His writing was not random. It was exact, deliberate, like the strokes of an artist painting on canvas. Numbers flowed into symbols, symbols into patterns, patterns into meaning. The problem that looked impossible began to bend under his hand, reshaping into clarity. The professors, once smiling, now narrowed their eyes. The youngest frowned, stepping closer to the board. The oldest professor's arms slowly uncrossed. The boy said nothing. He did not explain. He let the chalk speak for him. Minutes passed. The room was silent now. The air grew heavy, every sound swallowed by the scratching chalk. Students leaned forward in disbelief. The impossible was no longer impossible. It was being solved right before their eyes. And then, just as his hand stopped, just as the final line of the solution appeared on the board, the bell rang, marking the end of class. The sound was sharp, but no one moved. No one laughed. No one whispered. The boy placed the chalk down, turned, and looked at the professors. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He did not smile. He did not bow. He did not speak. The silence of the hall was louder than thunder. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The lecture hall was still heavy with silence after the student placed the chalk back on the ledge. The sound of the bell had faded, but no one dared to leave. The students who once laughed now sat frozen. The professors, who had expected humiliation, stood like statues, their pride cracked by what they had just witnessed. The young black student did not rush. He stood calm, his eyes scanning the room filled with faces. Faces that had mocked him, doubted him, judged him before he ever spoke a word. He did not need their approval. But inside, he felt something burning, something deeper than pride. For years, he had lived in shadows. People called him names. Teachers ignored his questions. Neighbors told him to stop dreaming so high. Every step forward had been a battle against walls built by others. But now, in this room filled with the so-called elite, he had shown what they never believed. His mind was powerful, his patience unmatched. The youngest professor finally broke the silence. His voice was shaky, almost unwilling to believe. "That problem," he said, pointing at the board, "was not for students. It was for senior researchers." Gasps rippled through the room. Students exchanged looks of disbelief. Some whispered, under their breath, "He solved it? Completely? That's impossible." But the equation was there, clear and perfect, every step shining like truth written in stone. The professor took a step closer, studying the lines, his face pale. "No mistakes," he muttered. "Not a single mistake." The boy remained quiet. His silence was louder than any speech. He knew they expected him to celebrate, to boast, to shout his victory, but he did not need to. His work spoke for itself. The oldest professor finally cleared his throat. His voice was low but carried through the hall. "Do you realize what you have just done?" The boy met his eyes. "Yes," he answered simply. The answer stunned them more than the solution. He was not arrogant, not boastful, just certain. It was the certainty of someone who had fought too many battles to be shaken by a single test. Some students looked ashamed, others looked inspired, but many still struggled to accept it. They could not believe that someone they judged so quickly had surpassed them so easily. The professors exchanged uneasy glances. Their plan had backfired. What was meant to humiliate had instead revealed greatness. The boy quietly gathered his books. His movements were calm, almost too calm. The whispers began again, but this time they were not filled with mockery. They were filled with awe, confusion, and fear. How did he do it? Who taught him? Is he a genius? As he walked down the aisle toward the exit, one student, a tall boy with golden hair, leaned back in his seat and smirked. Unlike the others, his pride was not broken. His voice cut through the whispers. Maybe he got lucky, he said loudly. One problem doesn't make him special. The room stirred. The professors looked uneasy. The boy stopped walking. For the first time, he turned to face his classmates. His eyes were calm, steady, but there was something powerful in them, something that made even the golden-haired boy shift uncomfortably. The boy spoke. His voice was low, but it carried across the hall like thunder in a storm. Luck does not write every line. Luck does not explain every step. Luck does not build years of patience, study, and sacrifice. This is not luck. This is knowledge. This is discipline. The room fell silent again. No one dared to laugh now. The professors tried to regain control. The middle-aged professor, known for his sharp tongue, said quickly, "If what you say is true, then prove it again. Solve another." The boy's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something stronger. Resolve. He walked back to the board. With one hand, he picked up the chalk. With the other, he erased the old equation. "Give me any problem," he said. "The hardest you have." The professors hesitated. For the first time in years, they were unsure. The room waited, the tension sharp as a blade. Finally, the oldest professor nodded slowly. He turned and wrote another problem. This one even more terrifying. A question whispered about only in advanced circles. As the chalk touched the board again, the boy's mind came alive. Numbers did not confuse him. They danced. Equations were not enemies, they were friends. Patterns glowed in front of him like constellations in the night sky. The students leaned forward, unable to look away. His hand moved faster now, flowing, with certainty. Every line he drew connected to the next, every symbol falling into place as if the board itself wanted to reveal its secrets to him. Whispers started again, but this time they carried awe, not cruelty. He's explaining it as he goes. He's making it simple. Yes. As he solved, he spoke, not to the professors but to the class. His words were clear, simple, like a teacher guiding children through a path in the forest. Complex. Theories turned into small steps anyone could follow. The laughter was gone. The smirks were gone. The arrogance of the professors had turned into tight jaws and restless hands. Minutes passed. The boy finished the second problem with a single stroke of chalk. He stepped back, his breathing calm, his eyes steady. The board, once filled with chaos, now shined with perfect order. He turned to the professors. His voice was calm but sharp. Knowledge is not power when kept to yourself. It is power when it cannot be denied. The hall erupted, not with laughter, not with whispers, but with thunderous applause. Students clapped, some stood, some cheered. Even those who doubted him now could not resist. The golden-haired boy sat silent, his face red with shame. The professors looked at each other, speechless. Their plan had collapsed completely. The silent genius had awakened, and this was only the beginning of his story. The echo of applause still lingered in the lecture hall, but the professors stood stiff, their faces drained of color. They had planned to shame the boy, to make him small before the entire class. Instead, he had turned their stage into his own battlefield, and victory was his alone. But professors of such pride could not bow easily. Their reputations were built on decades of authority, respect, and control. To be defeated by a student, worse, a student they had mocked, was a wound too deep for them to admit. The middle professor, the one with the sharp tongue, raised his hand, calling for silence. The clapping slowed, then faded. His voice cut through the heavy air. "Do not mistake applause for mastery," he said coldly. "A true scholar is tested many times. 2 problems do not make you a genius. The students shifted uncomfortably. They had seen enough to believe, but the professor's words carried the weight of authority. The golden-haired student smirked again, sensing the professor's support. The boy, however, remained calm. He did not argue. He looked at the professor, his eyes steady, and said softly, "Then test me again." The challenge was clear. The arrogance in the room was trembling but not yet broken. The professors exchanged glances. They could not let him walk out as a hero without at least trying to strike back. The oldest professor, respected for his wisdom, slowly stepped forward. His voice was deep, almost trembling with something he did not want to admit: respect. "If you wish to prove yourself further," he said, "then do what no student has ever done. Do not only solve the problem, teach it to us." The class gasped. To solve was one thing, but to teach professors, the elite masters of mathematics, was another. The boy did not hesitate. He walked back to the board, picked up the chalk, and looked at the crowd. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "Math is not about showing off," he said. "It is about seeing patterns where others see chaos. Let me show you." He began again, but this time he did not race. He slowed down, breaking each step into small, clear parts. He asked questions as he wrote, pulling the students into his thought process. "Why do we carry this number here?" he asked. A hesitant student answered. He nodded, encouraging. "Correct. And what happens when we shift this term?" Another voice, braver now, responded. Slowly, the fear in the room turned to curiosity. The same students who once laughed now leaned forward, eager to understand. His teaching was simple, natural, something even the professors struggled to match. The middle professor's jaw tightened. He had mocked this boy, but now he was watching him do what he himself failed to do: inspire. The boy finished the explanation, leaving the solution glowing on the board. He placed the chalk down and turned. "This is not my victory," he said. "This is proof that knowledge belongs to everyone, if it is explained in a way they can understand." The class erupted again, not in mockery, but in thunderous applause. This time it was louder, stronger, unstoppable. The walls seemed to shake with the sound. Students who had doubted him now looked at him with admiration. Some even stood, clapping with respect that could not be faked. The golden-haired boy, who once smirked with arrogance, now sat frozen, his pride crushed. He looked down at his desk, unable to meet the eyes of anyone around him. But the professors still stood, caught between pride and truth. The middle one was pale with anger, but the oldest professor's face was different now. He looked at the boy not with arrogance, but with recognition. He knew what he was seeing, something rare, something powerful, something that could not be denied. Finally, the oldest professor spoke again. His words were heavy but honest. "You have done what no student has done in this hall. You have not only solved, you have taught." The class hushed. His voice carried weight and everyone knew it. The professor's eyes softened, just for a moment. "I underestimated you," he admitted. Gasps filled the room. For a professor of his status, to say such words was beyond rare. It was unthinkable. But truth had forced its way through the cracks of pride. The middle professor looked away, his lips pressed tight. The youngest one clenched his fists, but he could not deny what he had seen. Their pride was breaking, whether they liked it or not. The boy did not smile. He did not gloat. He bowed his head slightly, a simple gesture of respect, and said, "Knowledge is not given by skin or wealth or status. It is earned through struggle, and I have struggled enough to know its worth." The words pierced the room like lightning. They were not just for the professors, they were for everyone who had ever doubted, laughed, or mocked. The applause came again, but this time it carried something more. It carried change. Students who had looked at him with contempt now looked at him with admiration. Some whispered among themselves, but their whispers were no longer cruel. They were words of respect. For the first time, the professors felt the weight of their own arrogance. Their pride had been broken, not by insults, not by rebellion, but by truth they could not deny. And in that moment, everyone in the hall knew. This boy was not just a student. He was something greater. This was not the end. This was the rise of a genius. The lecture hall had never felt this heavy before. The sound of applause still echoed faintly, but now it faded into a deep silence. Every student sat frozen, their eyes locked on the boy who had just shattered the pride of their professors. What was supposed to be a stage for humiliation had become a stage for revelation. The professors stood together, their authority trembling like glass on the edge of breaking. The oldest professor's words, "I underestimated you," still rang in the air like a confession that no one ever expected to hear. For years, these professors were gods within this hall. Their words were law, their judgments final. Students feared them, obeyed them, worshipped their knowledge. But now, one student had forced them into silence, not with arrogance, but with truth too powerful to deny. The young black student stood, calm. He had no need to boast, no need to smile. His victory was not in their applause, but in the fact that he had shown what they refused to see. Brilliance knows no color, no background, no boundary. The golden-haired boy sat hunched in his induri seat, his smirk gone, replaced with shame. He avoided everyone's eyes, his pride broken completely. His words from earlier, "Maybe he got lucky," now sounded foolish, even to himself. The middle professor, who had mocked the student most harshly, stepped forward, his face hard. He tried to steady his voice, but cracks of frustration slipped through. "You have surprised us," he said slowly. "But remember, respect is not earned in a single day." The class stirred. Some students nodded, but most frowned. They knew what they had seen. They had witnessed skill beyond anything they had ever imagined. To dismiss it as a single day was nothing more than wounded pride speaking. The boy met the professor's eyes, calm and steady. "Respect is not given in a day," he said softly. "But disrespect can be ended in one." The words struck like lightning. Gasps filled the room. Even the youngest professor shifted uncomfortably at the boldness of the reply. The middle professor's jaw tightened. He wanted to fight back, but his own authority had already been shattered. The equation on the board was undeniable proof, and proof cannot be silenced. The oldest professor raised a hand. His voice was quiet, but strong. "Enough," he said. "What we have witnessed today cannot be ignored." He stepped closer to the boy, his eyes not filled with arrogance now, but something different. Reluctant respect. "You have done what no student has done before. You have not only solved problems, you have revealed us to ourselves. Perhaps we forgot what true learning is meant to be." The room grew silent again. Students looked at one another, stunned. To hear such words from a professor of his rank was like watching a mountain bow. The boy lowered his head slightly, a humble nod. "Learning is not about proving who is weaker," he said. "It is about discovering who can rise higher together." The students erupted into applause once more, but this time it was not just loud, it was alive. It carried passion, hope, and fire. Even those who once whispered cruel words now clapped with genuine admiration. For the first time, the boy's presence was not a target of mockery. It was a source of inspiration. The youngest professor, who had first called him to stand, finally spoke. His face was pale, his voice low. "You made us look like fools," he admitted, his pride bleeding through every word. "But perhaps we deserved it." The middle professor looked away, unable to speak. His pride would not let him admit the truth, but silence itself was a confession. The boy turned to face the students. His voice rose, calm but commanding. "You laughed at me because of who I am, not because of what I know. But knowledge cannot be measured by skin or clothes or where you come from. Knowledge is the fire you keep alive, even when the world tries to put it out." The students were silent, but their silence was not of mockery anymore. It was of respect. His words cut through them deeper than any lecture they had ever heard. In the corner, a young girl with bright eyes whispered, almost in awe, "He's not just a student, he's a leader." The professors could no longer deny it. Their attempt to humiliate had turned into their own humiliation. The truth had forced itself into the open. The boy they wanted to crush had risen above them, not just with numbers but with wisdom and humility that they themselves had forgotten. The oldest professor finally extended his hand toward the boy. The hall froze. Such a gesture was unheard of. "You have my respect," he said. The boy looked at the hand, then slowly shook it. His grip was firm, but his face remained calm. He did not need their respect to know his worth, but this moment was proof that truth, once revealed, cannot be buried again. The students erupted once more, standing now, cheering, clapping, shouting his name. What started as whispers of cruelty had become chants of admiration. The boy had not only earned their respect, he had forced it from those who believed themselves untouchable. But deep inside, he knew this was not the end. Respect inside one. Hall was only the first step. The world outside was bigger, harsher, and filled with even greater walls, and he was ready to face them all. The lecture hall slowly emptied, but the echoes of what happened refused to fade. Students whispered to one another as they left, not about the professors, but about the boy who had changed everything. For the first time, his name carried weight, not as an outcast, but as someone who had proved himself beyond all doubt. The professors remained behind, standing in silence. Their faces were unreadable, but deep within each of them carried the sting of pride broken. They had set a trap for a student they thought unworthy, yet he had turned it into his stage of triumph. Respect had been forced out of them, and though some gave it reluctantly, none could deny the truth. The boy walked out of the hall quietly. He did not celebrate. He did not smile. His heart was steady, his steps calm. He knew this was only one battle in a much larger war. The war of proving that greatness is not owned by a few, but can rise from anywhere. Word spread fast. By the next day, the entire campus was buzzing. Students in every corridor whispered about him. Some told the story with awe, others with disbelief. But all of them knew one thing. The boy had changed the way people saw him. In the cafeteria, students who once mocked him now moved aside, giving him space. Some approached shyly, asking for help with assignments. At first he said little, but when he saw the sincerity in their eyes, he nodded and explained, just as he had in the lecture hall. His words were simple, his tone calm, and even the most complex problems became clear under his guidance. The same classmates who once laughed now listened. The same whispers that once carried cruelty now carried admiration. Slowly, respect grew, not the forced kind but genuine, born from recognition of his brilliance. But not everyone was ready to change. The golden-haired student still carried bitterness in his chest. He tried to ignore the whispers, tried to hold on to his pride, but every time he saw the boy explaining calmly to others, he felt smaller. His arrogance had no ground to stand on anymore. The professors, too, carried their own struggles. For men who had spent decades believing in their superiority, it was not easy to accept that one student had shaken their world. Yet deep down, they knew the truth. They had been wrong. 1 week later, the dean of the university himself called the boy into his office. The room was large, filled with tall bookshelves and certificates of honor. The dean, a man with sharp eyes and calm voice, looked at the student with deep interest. "I have heard what happened," the dean said. "The professors speak of it with hesitation, but the students speak of it with fire. You have become a symbol here." The boy sat quietly, hands folded, waiting. The dean leaned forward. "Do you know what you have done?" The boy looked him in the eye. "I showed them I belong." The dean smiled faintly. "No, you did more than that. You reminded this place what true education is meant to be." The boy lowered his eyes for a moment. He had not come here for fame or attention. He had come to learn, to grow, to fight for a place in a world that wanted to push him down. Yet somehow his struggle had turned into something larger. It had become a light for others. Over the following months, the boy's reputation grew. Students from different faculties sought him out, asking for help, not just in mathematics, but in discipline, patience, and courage. He never raised his voice, never mocked, never turned anyone away. His calm presence became a reminder. Greatness is not loud. It is steady. Even the professors changed. The oldest began to include him in advanced research discussions. The youngest, who once smirked at him, now watched with quiet respect. The middle professor said little, but he no longer dared to challenge the boy with mockery. Their pride had been forced to bow. The boy's journey did not stop at the university. His story spread beyond its walls. News traveled, and people outside began to speak of the student who had humbled elite professors and inspired an entire campus. For young men and women who had been told they did not belong, his story became a torch. He walked through crowded streets, and sometimes strangers stopped him. "Are you the one they talk about?" they asked. He only nodded, his humility unchanged. One evening, as he studied alone in his small room, he looked at the scattered books, the worn pages, the dim lamplight. He thought of where he had started, ignored, mocked, underestimated. He thought of the walls he had broken, the battles he had fought in silence. A small smile touched his lips. Not because he had defeated professors, not because he had won applause, but because he had proved to himself that no obstacle was too strong for persistence. And he knew this was just the beginning. One day, the world would forget the whispers of humiliation, but they would never forget the lesson he left behind. Respect is not given. It is taken by truth. And truth shines brightest when the world tries hardest to bury it.